is to go off script, to improvise, freestyle, or act on instinct. Hi, I'm Liv. Join me as I ad-lib my way through stories from the vaults, unsolicited sarcasm, bewitching wisdom, and creative insight on how to become our greatest work of art. Here we will discover our wildest and most unscripted selves. Yes, that self, the one that was never meant to be tamed. Welcome back to Adlib with Liv. Thanks so much for joining me for our 5th episode. Okay, cool. We hit a month and we're heading into our 2nd month of creating episodes. And I just want to thank you each for being a part of this little journey so far. I think I know everyone who's listening, but if there's an opportunity to connect with some people that I don't know and I haven't met or I'm just getting to know, welcome to the show and welcome to my journey of figuring out how to be a podcaster, how to structure a podcast that I feel like is authentic to me and tells the stories that I think are important and that I'm passionate about and curious about. And yeah, we're laughing, we're crying, we're ad-libbing. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. It goes a really long way. Just having that like button hit if you're on YouTube, leaving a comment and following on Spotify, Apple, or any other place that you get your podcasts. The support goes a really long way. And it also helps me connect with more people who I don't know, who are outside of my circle. And that's the point, is to spark conversation and connect across borders with people who are everywhere and anywhere. So I'm just finishing off my holiday celebration of Dia de Muertos here in Mexico City. And I wish I had done more, but I also am really grateful for the experiences that I did have. And, you know, I had a rough week. My phone went kaput. I had to replace it. And figuring out the new technology for the podcast has been a little bit of a thing. So yeah, I spent a couple days dealing with that, you know, tech drama. And dealing with it in another country can be a little bit challenging because it's harder to get a phone. It's way more expensive. They don't have all the options that you might need. And it just takes time. So that took up a couple days. And then I got to celebrate by going to the parade downtown. I ended up seeing the parade right outside of Bellas Artes, which was beautiful. And then once the parade closed, I ended up walking. My goal was to end up at the Zocalo. And I knew it would be a little bit of a shit show because there's a million people in downtown Mexico City for this celebration. And the Zocalo is the main square where the largest iglesia is, the largest church. And it's where they were having this huge event, which I didn't even know. I just kind of assumed. I was like, I'm pretty sure there's an event. I'm going to go. So the parade finishes and I'm just determined to get down to the main center. So I just start walking in that direction with millions of other people. I mean, we're shoulder to shoulder. Thank God I'm tall because I have claustrophobia. So at least my head was above most of the crowd. And then all of a sudden I look around and there's gates on either side of the street where all the crowds were and still are, and they're all closed off. So there's only a certain section that you can enter to get directly to the Zocalo. And I happen to be in that flow of traffic, flow of people. And so I'm walking down Cinco de Mayo, which is a huge avenue that connects to the center. And I'm with thousands of other people, but I'm like 10 rows deep. Right after the parade ends, you know, the police are there to close the event. And then there's a row of people and I'm right there. And we're walking through these gorgeous historic streets and people are waving and cheering and, you know, they're saying vuelta, 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 which means like spin around, do a little dance. You know, they're engaging. I felt like I was in the parade and I felt kind of weird. I'm like, I'm just this güera, like walking through, like I have nothing to do with the culture. I'm just happened to be here and I'm really dead set on getting to the Zocalo. So anyways, it was really magical and the sun's setting. So the lights are starting to come out and twinkle. And then I make it to the center of the Zocalo and it is absolutely stunning. And the Mexican flag is situated in the center and it's waving under the new moon. And they have fields of marigolds that they placed, I think about a week ago to start celebrating the holiday. And so there's red lights shining on these like fields of marigolds. And then, so it kind of feels, it feels a little witchy. It feels magical. It feels very moody. And then amidst the fields of marigolds are these giant statues of calaveritas and indigenous skeletons dressed in like Aztec wardrobes. And the famous quetzal, which is this beautiful turquoise bird that's native to the area. Series of like really beautiful statues and figurines that are all representative of the indigenous Aztec culture. So, there was a moment before the crowds really took over because we were like one of the first groups to come into the center, and it felt very sacred. And I was by myself by choice. I wasn't feeling social. I really just wanted to have this experience and be really present with myself. So I just ended up like really, it felt like I was just kind of floating through this arena of, historic buildings lit up, the glow of the marigolds, and all these people who are very calm. The energy is very tranquilo. It's not I've been to like big parties in Mexico, and when, there's a lot of, drinking and people are loud, and it's just a very different energy. This felt very chill, very sacred. It's kids and their families, it's elderly. So the energy just felt really nice. The crown jewel of the night was there was a concert, and I wasn't sure what the energy was going to be. I thought this could be, a banda, which would be great, or a mariachi, or it could be, like maybe a female singer singing some like indigenous songs. I didn't know, but I was speculating. And I just said, you know what, I'm here, and this is my first time being in Mexico City for Dia de Muertos, so I'm going to take a seat. It was, of course, a beautiful free concert with this impressive stage set up right in the middle, like incredible lighting. Everything was dialed. It was an opera with a live orchestra with a screen in the background that was playing a movie that was made, I think, especially for this event, a gorgeous black and white film, like so artistic, so stunning. So the orchestra starts off, and then and then this incredible scene of opera singers comes through, and the performance in total was like, I think, an hour and 20 minutes. So it was substantial. And it was the entire history of Tenochtitlan, and which is the capital of the Mexicas and is now modern day Mexico City. And people are really connected to their history here, and that's something that I just love. This performance was so moving, and it was visually really striking between the film and the lights, and then looking around. And there was one of my favorite parts was they always have cotton candy at like any feria, any event, any weekend in Bosque de Chapultepec. You'll see giant machines producing just balls of cotton candy. And so during the whole performance, under the twinkling lights, there would be this web of cotton candy that would roll through the Zocalo. And honestly, it felt like the spirits. It felt like these ghostly creatures just kind of moving through the space. And sometimes the kids will jump out of the crowd and try to grab a piece, and it acted like some extra texture to the experience that I just loved. The parade and the show, I think, are very iconic things to experience in Mexico City. So I was really happy that I got to see that. I did miss not going to a Panteon, a cemetery, but I got to do that 2 years in a row, and I probably will do that next year, to be honest, because it's such an important piece of Mexican culture. Let's get into today's episode. Being in Mexico City is kind of it's a developing story. When you first land in a new place as a foreigner, as a visitor, you have like some rose tinted lenses on, right? And I think for me, it's always this process of once I feel comfortable and like safe in a new city, a new space, I always want to get out of the main mix of things. I always want to get out of the trendy neighborhoods, because like as a writer, as an observer, I'm very interested in the interactions between people, and taking more of like an anthropological look at a society and how people interact and engage. My favorite thing is to sit in a park and watch people exist. And in Mexico, in Latin America in general, this is the place to be an observer. Latinos live out loud. They're just open with how they exist in the world, Like, for example, you go to a park And it's not just people walking their dogs and sitting on benches and having a coffee or an ice cream. A group over here is like young teenage girls learning a new pop dance, wearing, leather get-ups and having like and playing a little boombox. And then on the other side of the park, you have a group of salsa dancers who are taking free salsa lessons. And then in the other corner, you have musicians, you have violinists who are taking their violin classes outside. And then adjacent to them on the other corner, you might have boxers or martial artists taking a class or doing a one-on-one with an instructor. And everybody's practicing and being witnessed publicly. And I just find that so different from how I grew up. And so I'm going to talk about a few things that I've noticed in Mexican culture. I think you probably wouldn't notice as a traveler but once you're here for a little bit and you get to sink into things and you get to really be in that place of observation. And what I would say is observation equals appreciation, because you have like kind of fuzzied the lines of judgment and you get to sit in a place of allowing things to be exactly as they are without needing to change them or control them. So for me, observation is a practice of appreciation. And lucky enough, Mexico is a really easy place to appreciate. Something I've been noticing is this very authentic intercambio or exchange of like services between people. And I noticed this when I was at a taqueria and there was a bunch of plates that had been left over from other customers and, half drink glasses. And this, elderly man came over and he looked like he might be unhoused. He didn't have the nicest clothes on and, had a really old pair of shoes and wasn't in the best shape. And he didn't work at the taqueria, but he came over and he cleaned up all the plates and made sure everything went where they needed. And the guys at the taqueria, just chatting with him, everything was super peaceful. And, they get him a plate of tacos. And then there was another time, this actually happened really recently. I go to this really good coffee shop in Juarez called Café La Juarez. And it's right on this little alleyway. And I love it because it's in a touristy area, but it's kind of in the middle of locals and tourists, because there's nice Airbnbs and there's new apartment complexes, but then there's also a lot of locals, but then there's also a very strong Mexican community there. And it's a really fun place to people watch. And the other day I was locking up my bike to a tree. This man, Francisco, was sitting right behind the tree and he said, "Hey, like I can watch your bike for you. It's okay. It's safe here." And I was like, "Thank you so much. That's so sweet." And vibes were good. I was like, this man actually will watch my bike. Like I had full trust. I had it locked, but still it was like just to have eyes on it gives you a little bit more peace of mind. And so, I introduced myself, I find out his name, and, I asked him, I said, "Do you live around here?" And he said, "En el calle, in the street." And he proceeded to tell me about how, he helps out with local businesses. If someone needs the street to be swept or they need help cleaning or picking things up, he will be there to help out and people take care of him. And so I went and I got him a chocolate from the cafe and, we just had like a really great conversation. He was so nice, so cool, told me about a leg injury that he had that he's been recovering from that doesn't stop him from showing up and helping out. And, he just says that people take care of each other. And that stuff gets me, because to me, that is like the point of it all. And that, leads me to the point of this kind of exchange between people and making sure that people's needs are met and making sure that people are helping out and not just getting like a handout or getting, a taco just like given to them, there would be nothing wrong with that, of course. Like if someone doesn't have food, please, like let's all make sure they get food. But Mexicans have this like sort of unspoken rule that allows everybody to be taken care of, that prioritizes people, even though they could easily have someone clean up the plates and the cups at the taqueria, no problema. They don't necessarily need Francisco to sweep the front of their property, I mean, I would argue that they do though, because people have a million things to do. There's a lot going on. And so I actually think just shows how integrated Mexicans are and Latinos in general, because I've seen this in other countries as well. But I see it really presently here. And I think You know, there seems to be this idea that everybody has something to contribute. And yeah, as much as there is classism and there are hierarchies here, 100%, there is also, I would say, from a lot of interactions that I've seen, there's such a strong sense of community. And it's like, I got your back. And if you need something, like, I'll take care of you. Like, I'll drop what I'm doing to make sure you have what you need. I mean, this is something that tourists would notice. If you're lost and you can't figure something out, a Mexican will stop immediately and help you. Even if there's a language barrier, they will take their time to figure out what you need to get where you need to go, because there's this concept of not rushing, and that can be difficult because sometimes you're like trying to get something done and it's not happening. But I would argue that it's so much better to be tranquilo and like mañana, you know, it'll happen, than to be so rushed and so stressed that you can't stop to help somebody. I also think that's something that people may or may not notice this traveling to Mexico, but the organized chaos of it all, because it can feel kind of heavy, you know, especially like downtown Mexico City and El Centro. It's impuestos, or like little street shops, just packed with stuff, and, you know, shoulder to shoulder people. And there's, you know, motos on one side and cars on one side and pedestrians on one side, and everything is just this like blur of energy. Some people are rushing and some people are taking their time, and you're trying to figure out where you want to go, and it's this mix of like stuff you can buy, things you can eat, with tchotchkes and just their impuestos like overflowing with fruit. And you just feel so overwhelmed. And like, how does anyone function in this? You know, the traffic is really heavy, especially if you live outside of the city a little bit. I mean, people commute hours to get to their jobs. And then you have these stores. I'm so fascinated by these stores. They remind me of my grandpa Joe, who was an engineer and an inventor. And his workshop, you know, growing up, the garage, the basement, you know, all the places where Joe's shop was set up, was like this kind of organized chaos where you had 100 different wrenches in a drawer and like 1,000 different types of nails or tornillos, screws. You know, he would fix and repair skis, and so he had ski parts hanging everywhere. And you would look at this space and you would say, how does he know where anything is? How does he accomplish anything? Like, it just looks like kind of chaos to the average person. But he was brilliant and he made amazing things happen, and he could repair anything, and he made jewelry. I mean, he was like limitless in what he could make. And I see that same ability with Mexicans here. There was a store that I drove by the other day. I was in downtown in El Centro, where it's just like heavy energy, and like all the shops are there, you know, where you can go and get like random blender parts and all the things. You know, you can fix a microwave, things like that, repair shoes. And this one shop was car parts, and it just was this beautiful collage of parts. And the parts were stacked on shelves, and then behind the first stack of things was another stack of things, each other, different styles, different designs. I don't know anything about car filters, but there was a system to this madness. And then that was just one shelf. And then outside they had just, you know, giant cajitas, giant bins filled with other parts. And I mean, these parts are, from my knowledge, not labeled, you know, or like organized in any way. And yet I bet you could go in there and get exactly what you needed. And it's also not really regulated, right? So that's a huge thing that I noticed from the States, is that everything is regulated, everything is systemized, and in a way that's phenomenal. Like, we love that. It's easy, you know exactly what part you're going to get, da, 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 da. But there's this energy of like adventure going into these shops and looking for something that you need. And like, it makes it so much more fun, I think, when you accomplish that thing, when you go in to get this perfect air filter for your car, and this guy goes through 7 layers of filters and finally finds the right one. Like, that's a win. What a success story. So this last weekend for the parade, I was walking through like the Bellas Artes area, and I was just observing, and then I look down and I see this gorgeous, what I think is some contemporary art display of everyday objects, utilitarian objects. But really, it's the trabajadoras, the workers in the city, who all wear these, you can like recognize them because they wear these maroon jumpsuits or vests, and they sweep and clean and pick up the city. Men and women had all of their escobas, all of their broomsticks laid out in perfect symmetrical order, and then all their different cleaning products and hand sweepers and garbage bags were just stylized. This was like, this is so impressive. And then as the parade started, I saw them. They were the first people to come through, and they would walk through right outside of the gates, where everybody else was behind, and they would walk around and they would say, hey, does anyone have any trash? And they would make sure that people that could have an opportunity to put their trash in a trash bag before the parade starts, so to mitigate, having an abundance of trash afterwards. So just little things like that. I appreciate the hard labor that people do. That is not lost on me. Also really recognize how hard that work is, and that must be really taxing. And, I hope that those people are also taken care of. Also, the trash trucks here are incredible. So first of all, to know that the trash guy is here, they're mostly guys, más o menos. They have a giant brass bell that they ring through the streets, and that is how they notify the people in the neighborhood that the trash pickup is there, and people come scurrying out of their houses or their trash taken care of. And these trash trucks are phenomenal. I don't know how they don't tip over. They look like cartoon trucks. They are stacked sky high with cardboard, plastic bottles, glass bottles, all the food, all the organic trash in the back, and everything is strapped down, but it's like dangling a little bit from the side of the truck, and it just becomes this like moving piece of art, and it functions. I've never seen one have an accident. Less regulation comes more resourcefulness, because you kind of have to regulate yourselves and find systems that work for, your immediate community, and that also like the community as a whole, the large scale Mexico City. And I just love observing how this is done here and how people come up with ways to make systems work. Okay, another thing is the culture of giving in Mexico. And I would say in other Latin cities that I've experienced as well, but I would say it's more pronounced here. So when I say the culture of giving, what do I mean? I mean that people are so generous, and Mexicans will often give more than they have, and will do it without thinking twice, and will make sure that your needs are met, and that you are content, and you get to have a good time, and you have a great experience, even if it maybe puts them out or isn't the smartest decision for them, because now they have less of that thing that maybe they needed. Now, I've seen this in the markets. When I go shopping, I will pick up a bouquet of flowers, and they'll always tuck in a few extra stems, like always, every time, no matter what shop I go to. I will purchase, a certain amount of avocados, and then they'll give me like a couple limes for free. But I also think when you take it outside of the transactional relationship, you actually see this everywhere you go. I've talked to some friends who are Mexican and would say that it is just a value of theirs that they give, because if they have enough to give, they always give. And then I've talked to other people who say that it's something that, maybe they should be more mindful of, and maybe they're overgiving. And that could be, both of those things could be true, of wanting to share, but maybe not always having enough to share, or wanting to, it's like this, it's kind of a love language, it's a love language. You want people to feel good. And so if you have something that could maybe immediately make them feel good or feel seen, they do that. And I'm so grateful for that. I also am like sensitive of taking, I don't want to be taking something that someone else could benefit from or could use. So I think there's this kind of, what it comes down to is like, what are you giving back to a place? And I think that's something I'm always asking myself. And it's something that I really, have to say, well, what is it that I could bring that is beneficial and that could help people? People would say, well, it's the energy you bring, or it's the thoughtfulness or the conscientiousness that you bring that really that really contributes to a place. And while I completely agree, I also think that living in a place, because I'm so privileged to be here and so grateful to be witnessing all of these situations and understanding how Mexicans live and operate and engage with each other, I also want to know how I can engage more thoughtfully. And it's not always easy, I think, to be just to integrate into a new culture, but by observing these things, I am invited to see, how am I showing up with my friends? How am I showing up when I'm in a community space? And not thinking about so much of what I can take and what I can bring. Food for thought. So Spanish, of course, is the language that was brought by the Spanish to Mexico. And before the Spanish came, there were hundreds of indigenous dialects. One of the most common being Nahuatl, which is pre-Hispanic Mexica, spoken by the Aztecs. And they still use so many words that are not exactly like the perfect pronunciation of the original Nahuatl. Nahuatl? It's a hard word to say. Has this T and L in most of their words that's I'm not used to saying. So these words are sort of adaptations of the original word, but they're still used in everyday conversations. You'll hear a lot of Zapotec in Oaxaca specifically, but also here in Mexico City. And I'm going to give you a few. So next time you're visiting, you can use these words because they are common enough to be used in everyday language. And they will remind you that there is this really strong connection from modern day Mexico to the Mexicas in Mexico. Okay, so the first one is Cempasúchil from Dia de Muertos, of course, are the marigolds that are seen all across Mexico during this time of the year. Cempasúchil. Tianguis. I've mentioned this before, but a tianguis is a pop-up marketplace versus a mercado, which is a building that you can get all of your fruits and veggies and household things. So, tianguis. Cacahuates are peanuts. Cacahuate. This is a good one. Atol, which is a hot masa drink that they season with vanilla and other spices. It can be kind of like a dessert drink. It's so good. They serve it all over Oaxaca for sure. I've seen it less here in Mexico City, but I know it's here as well. So if you're in the city, you can look for places that sell it. But masa is a corn flour that they make, and it's this very like creamy, rich drink, and that dates back all the way to the Aztecs. The last one that I love is popote, which is a straw to drink from. So if you go to a bar or restaurant, you can ask for a popote. And so when language is preserved, you preserve culture, you preserve history. So I find it so important that these words are used and that we also understand where these words came from and what stories and histories they're tied to. So that's a wrap on the things that you might not notice as a traveler visiting Mexico City, but that I believe are some of the more interesting elements of the city, what makes me appreciate, how things are done, how people interact, and it also showcases the values of Mexicans. And that has been one of my biggest takeaways of being here is what people value. It's family, food, celebration, enjoyment, history, and being proud of your origins. So yeah, stay tuned for more conversations around Mexican culture, as well as some of my other experiences in Latin America and what I've learned. And I hope this resonated with some of you and felt maybe possibly like an invitation to look closer at the interactions in your own communities and what speaks to you and what you can learn about people by observing and appreciating. Thanks again, as always, for tuning in to Ad Lib with Liv. I'll see you guys next week. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe and like and all the things to keep this flowing. I appreciate you all so much. Abrazos de Mexico.